Good evening and welcome. It is time once again for CU Immigration here on WRFU LP Urbana 104.5 FM. I will be your host for this evening. My name is Mr. Garza, and I am here to let you know that WRFU is an open forum for the Urbana-Champaign community. Views expressed are those of the speakers and are not intended to represent WRFU, UCIMC, or, as we like to say in this show, UPTV, because this is also broadcast on UPTV. It's been a week or so since I was on last. You can follow the progression of this series by how long my hair is getting, because I haven't had a haircut in a while. We've been locked down, staying home, doing our best to avoid contagion or being contagious to anyone else. And so this is what you get. More in-home recording facility and news reading. But that's just the way things are these days, and probably will be for a while. So please bear with me for the unprofessional quality of the recording. Anyway, the first article that I wanted to read to you today is entitled, ICE Tells Federal Judge That the court has no authority over its detention practices. U.S. immigration officials have told a Miami federal judge that the court has no authority over how the government chooses to detain and release immigration detainees, and that filing twice weekly accountability reports to the court would be unduly burdensome. Over the weekend, U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement filed a response objecting to a recommendation made by Magistrate Judge Jonathan Goodman late Wednesday night. Goodman's 69-page recommendation, which will be reviewed by the U.S. District Judge Marcia G. Cook this week, says ICE should substantially reduce detainee populations at 3 South Florida detention centers as COVID-19 positive cases continue to climb behind bars. The report's directives as to how ICE is to exercise its detention authority exceeds this court's jurisdiction to adjudicate cases and controversies, ICE attorneys said. There is no basis for this court's oversight of ICE's administration of its sound policies. Last week, Goodman stopped short of recommending that roughly 1,200 detainees be released from the Chrome Processing Center in Miami-Dade and Broward Transitional Center in Pompano Beach, and the Glades County Detention Center in Moorhaven, but said the agency should be required to prove that it's accelerating the release process for non-criminal detainees by submitting twice-weekly reports. Those reports would have to detail the number of detainees who were released, as well as whether they are high risk, subject to mandatory detention, or have no criminal record or pending criminal charges. His recommendation also included having a neutral, court-appointed expert inspect the 3 centers and file a number of opinions and reports on whether the agency is following proper protocols. Such an order is unnecessarily broad, unduly burdensome, and unwarranted, the agency said in a court filing Friday, noting that a twice-weekly report would not yield more meaningful information than a report filed once every 2 weeks or, at a minimum, once a week. I said the detainee population at Chrome, Broward, and Glades is managed by a number of staffers, including deportation officers and their assistants, making filing such frequent reports laborious. Well, maybe it's laborious too, but it's laborious in this instance and difficult. Decreasing the frequency of reporting would relieve some of the administrative burden imposed on ICE to analyze data, review files, and having its employees enter the workspace, while at the same time producing the information needed by the court, the agency wrote. ICE's objection to Goodman's recommendation is part of a lawsuit filed by immigration advocates earlier this month, which sought the release of about 1,200 detainees inside the 3 facilities. Goodman said the court does not have the authority to issue such an order. But the petitioners in the case, lawyers for the University of Miami's Immigration Law Clinic, the Southern Poverty Law Center, the Rapid Defense Network in New York, Americans for Immigrant Justice, the Legal Aid Service of Broward County, private Miami law firm Prada Urizer and King and Spalding, an international firm based in Washington, D.C., said Goodman misunderstood the nature of the lawsuit and underestimated the court's authority in protecting detainees' lives, describing his recommendations to ICE as far too modest. When the proper context of this case is understood, that this is a case involving men and women in civil detention who are seeking release to avoid irreparable harm, not people serving criminal sentences seeking to improve their conditions, the magistrate's unassailable factual conclusions inevitably lead to one legal conclusion. The court should release petitioners and order ICE to implement CDC guidance and protocols because detention facility administrators are bound by constitutional requirements even when they are dealing with difficult and unfamiliar challenges to public health and safety, the petitioners wrote. The groups told the judge the court does have the authority to order the release of ICE detainees because other federal judges around the country have already done it. They cited a federal court decision made as recently as Thursday, where the District Court for the Central District of California considered a nearly identical case and ordered ICE to immediately release detained individuals, so that remaining detained individuals could follow CDC guidelines for social distancing. Indeed, federal judges across the country have ordered the urgent release of numerous immigrants because of the pressing health risks created by ICE detention and other types of imprisonment, the petitioners wrote. The court should do the same here. Earlier this month, the lawsuit prompted the judge to order ICE to disclose how many detainees and staffers have tested positive for the coronavirus. The order came after a Miami Herald story reported that the agency did not consider its third-party contractors' ICE staff, and that the agency said it had no obligation to include them on its website, detailing how many employees at its detention center nationwide had contracted the virus. All 3 detention centers in South Florida, as well as 214 of its other 222 centers nationwide, are operated by third-party contractors. As of Wednesday, ICE reported that only 4 detainees in Florida had tested positive for the virus and that they are being housed at Chrome. 8 staff members at Chrome, which is run by Akima Global Services, also tested positive, the agency said in recent court filings. GEO Group, the contractor that runs the Broward facility, as well as the Glades County Sheriff's Office, which operates the Glades Detention Center, told the Herald that as of Monday there are no staff, employees, or contractors at the center who are recovering from or have tested positive for COVID-19. Akima did not respond to more than 10 emails from the Miami Herald seeking updated information. ICE has not submitted updated information to the courts on Glades and BTC. On Monday, ICE refused to disclose if additional detainees at any of the 3 facilities have tested positive for COVID-19 or if the centers have any suspected cases, citing pending litigation. ICE says it has tested 425 detainees out of its 32,000 nationwide, meaning that about 86% of the detainees with access to a test tested positive, data shows. So it sounds like a lot of weaving in and out to try to avoid having to do anything or say anything or tell anybody anything. This is par for the course with this administration. It's like, oh, you don't have any authority to tell me to do that. Oh, we don't have to do that because of this. Oh, we shouldn't have to do that because of that. Nowhere, it seems, is anyone actually responsible for anything, apparently. At least according to them. But we will continue on. So this next article is entitled, "This Pandemic Will Lead to Social Revolutions." We'll see. The most misleading cliche about the coronavirus is that it treats us all the same. It doesn't. neither medically nor economically, socially or psychologically. In particular, COVID-19 exacerbates pre-existing conditions of inequality wherever it arrives. Before long, this will cause social turmoil up to and including uprisings and revolutions. Now, this is a bold statement, editorial aside here, but it certainly could. It certainly could. We'll see if the conditions become stark enough to actually get there. But anyway, we'll read what this person has to say and see if we agree with it. Social unrest had already been increasing around the world before SARS-CoV-2 began its journey. According to one count, there have been about 100 large anti-government protests since 2017. From the riots in a rich country like France to demonstrations against strongmen in poor countries such as Sudan and Bolivia. About 20 of these uprisings toppled leaders, while several were suppressed by brutal crackdowns, and many others went back to simmering until the next outbreak. The immediate effect of COVID-19 is to dampen most forms of unrest, as both democratic and authoritarian governments force their populations into lockdowns, which keep people from taking to the streets or gathering in groups. But behind the doors of quarantined households, in the lengthening lines of soup kitchens, in prisons and slums and refugee camps, wherever people were hungry, sick, and worried even before the outbreak, tragedy and trauma are building up. One way or another, these pressures will erupt. The coronavirus has thus put a magnifying glass on inequality both between and within countries. In the U.S., there's been a move by some of the very wealthy to self-isolate on their Hamptons estates or swanky yachts. One Hollywood mogul swiftly deleted an Instagram picture of his $590 million boat after a public outcry. Even the merely well-heeled can feel pretty safe working from home via Zoom and Slack. But countless other Americans don't have that option. Indeed, the less money you make, the less likely you are to be able to work remotely. Lacking savings and health insurance, these workers in precarious employment have to keep their gigs or blue-collar jobs, if they're lucky enough to still have any, just to make ends meet. As they do, they risk getting infected and bringing the virus home to their families, which, like poor people everywhere, are already more likely to be sick and less able to navigate complex healthcare mazes. And so the coronavirus is coursing fastest through neighborhoods that are cramped, stressful, and bleak. Above all, it disproportionately kills black people. Even in countries with long histories of racial segregation, the virus prefers some zip codes over others. That's because everything conspires to make each neighborhood its own sociological and epidemiological petri dish, from average incomes and education to apartment size and population density, from nutritional habits to patterns of domestic abuse. In the Eurozone, for example, high-income households have an average almost double the living space as those in the bottom decile, 72 square meters against only 38. The differences between nations are even bigger. To those living in a shantytown in India or South Africa, there's no such thing as social distancing because the whole family sleeps in one room. There's no discussion about whether to wear masks because there aren't any. More hand washing is good advice unless there's no running water. And so it goes, whether SARS-CoV-2 shows up. The International Labor Organization has warned that it will destroy 195 million jobs worldwide and drastically cut the income of another 1.25 billion people. Most of them are already poor. As their suffering worsens, so do other scourges, from alcoholism and drug addiction to domestic violence and child abuse, leaving whole populations traumatized, perhaps permanently. In this context, it would be naive to think that, once this medical emergency is over, either individual countries or the world can carry on as before. Anger and bitterness will find new outlets. Early harbingers include millions of Brazilians banging pots and pans from their windows to protest against their government, or Lebanese prisoners rioting in their overcrowded jails. In time, these passions could become new populist or radical movements, intent on sweeping aside whatever ancient regime they define as the enemy. The great pandemic of 2020 is therefore an ultimatum to those of us who reject populism. It demands that we think harder and more boldly, but still pragmatically, about the underlying problems we confront, including inequality. It's a wake-up call to all who hope not just to survive the coronavirus, but to survive in a world worth living in. Well, that was an interesting article because I think it raises a point that I've mentioned before, particularly in relation to immigration. I mean, this doesn't really talk about immigration in particular, but it talks about the causes that drive people out of their chairs, out of their homes, into the streets, and to say enough about whatever their situation is. For some people, that leads them less to trying to change things at home and more trying to change where home is. So for some people, they're just, fed up with their lives, they're fed up with where they're living, they're fed up with the conditions that they have to live in, and they say, I'm not going to take this anymore, I'm going to move. And so they go somewhere else. That works as long as there's somewhere else to go. What the pandemic is doing is making places everywhere kind of risky, making movement risky, basically. Right now, the U.S. is viewed around the world as one of the riskier places to be, despite our self-promoting sense of, we've got great this and lovely that and wonderful healthcare and all this. We're doing terribly with this virus, and people are behaving badly, and the government is basically not functional at all. The federal government, states are just making stuff up as they go along, figuring it out for themselves and trying to coordinate with each other. And the rest of the world is saying, I don't think I want to go there. So not everyone is who wants to go somewhere is thinking of coming here. In fact, a lot of people who want to go somewhere are not thinking of coming here. I have friends in other countries, I will add, so I'm not just stating this from what I read in the news, I'm stating this from people that I've spoken to who basically say, what are you doing there? What's going on? Why are you doing such a bad job with this? And I generally have to say, I don't know. It's the government. It's the federal government. They're not taking this seriously. They're not doing this. They're not doing anything. They're not doing their job. They're doing something, but it's not what they should be doing. They're taking care of themselves, but they're not taking care of us. And as far as I can tell, they're not even really trying to. So it's bad. But be that as it may, this pandemic is going to shake things up in one way or another in a lot of different places. And I think one of the things that is going to happen is that people are going to want to move to new places when certain places start seeming attractive again. Country A gets it together, has a good federal government, and they figure out what they're doing, and they lower their virus levels, and it looks like a safe place to be. People from other places are going to want to go there, which will not be good news pandemic-wise, because there'll be people coming from unsafe places trying to move to safer places and bringing their contagion with them. So it's going to be a difficult time all the way around for a long time, and who knows what's going to happen. But it is interesting to think about how existing problems are only becoming worse because of the pandemic, which is showing up a lot of different problems. It's showing up lack of coordination, lack of leadership in countries like the U.S., where we have the entire federal government just sort of wandering around, bumping into things, and bumping into each other and giving mixed messages every other day about what's going on and what should be done about it. It's showing up in the differences in outcomes for people who do get sick, really sick, not just, stick at home. But, well, it's probably there too, but it's more obvious in the outcomes of people who end up in the hospital and end up dying because of these things. It's showing up the differences in how income affects people, how social standing affects people. I, for example, am doing just fine. I have no problems at all. I still have a job. I'm still getting paid. I have everything I need. It's pretty easy for me to just stay home. I don't have to, really, it's not a weighing of like, oh, if I stay home, I don't get to do this versus if I go out, I'm risking that. I just go to the store once a week and buy food, and otherwise, or go to my job, which is empty building. There's no one there but me most of the time. And so I'm having no problem at all. But some people are having huge problems, and I'm very aware of that and trying to figure out ways that I personally can reach out to help them. But it's hard because how do you know where they are? How do you know who needs help? You can't walk up to everybody and go, "You okay? You need help?" It's difficult. So this is just a really stressful time that is putting extra stress on existing fracture points in our society, and some will be able to stand up to that and some won't, and we will see how that turns out. We'll keep an eye on that as time goes by, and continue to report to you about what's going on. Okay. I'm going to read one more article here. And then I want to switch to some local information. But this thing is entitled, "Some U.S. Citizens Aren't Eligible for Stimulus Checks Because They're Married to Immigrants." This is a problem. The coronavirus stimulus package was meant to put emergency spending money into the economy, issuing a $1,200 check to most Americans that they can use to pay their bills in this time of hardship and help stimulate businesses in the process. Now, though, we're learning about all the strings that are coming attached to that hastily passed package, including the fact that U.S. citizens aren't eligible to receive the money if they're married and filed taxes jointly with an immigrant who doesn't have a Social Security number. The LA Times reports that there are more than 1 million Americans in this position across the country. This is just one more way the Trump administration has found to attack immigrants, no matter how they arrived in the country. According to the Times, the stimulus bill doesn't just pass over immigrants who don't pay any taxes. Any immigrant without a Social Security number, even if they have a tax ID and pay U.S. taxes, can render their entire family ineligible to receive any money. This isn't about documented versus undocumented immigration either. Immigrants to the U.S. receive a Social Security number only when they receive a work permit, which means there are a whole host of visas immigrants can use to come to the country perfectly legally, student, fiancé visas, for example, that won't get them a work permit or a Social Security card. For people on non-work visas, it's impossible to obtain a Social Security number until obtaining permanent resident status, which is a whole other process that takes a ton of paperwork, a ton of money, and months or even years of waiting, depending on how backed up the system was at the time they applied. The authors of this story interviewed a number of people who are in the middle of the months-long process of applying for a legal green card whose families won't receive stimulus checks because of it. Now, I want to take a little moment aside here and get some of these resources out. I've been looking around at local resource things. I'm going to put the information up on the screen while I talk, so I'm not going to read all the the links or the phone numbers or anything else. I'm just going to read what the assistance is, and then as I'm reading it, you'll hopefully, if I edit this correctly, you will see what I'm talking about, and you'll be able to copy down these numbers and whatever. So first, some COVID-19 resources for undocumented students. The first is DACA Renewal Assistance. The Immigration Law Clinic at the University of Illinois College of Law encourages students who are eligible to renew their DACA and seek legal counsel by emailing the number that you see here or calling the phone number here to set up an appointment. I'll leave that on the screen for a second so you can see it, and then we'll move on to emergency funding. The Student Assistance Center remains available to assist students, and they serve as the first point of contact for students contacting the Office of the Dean of Students. And to schedule a virtual meeting, please call the number you see here or email the address you see there. So this is for emergency funding. Now, counseling is something that a lot of people probably need right now. To schedule an appointment and connect with a counselor at the counseling center by calling the number you see or emailing the address that is shown here. The cultural and resource centers are available to help you out, and you can connect virtually with the Office of Inclusion and Intercultural Relations. I can't talk. The Office of Inclusion and Intercultural Relations, or the OIIR, including confidential advising services related to sexual misconduct via the Women's Resource Center at the numbers you see here. Also, DACA and undocumented student mentors are available. The Office of the Vice Chancellor for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion and La Casa Cultural Latina, I've always had trouble with that word, Cultural Latina, connect with current students who can assist you with gathering resources, navigating the institution, and provide guidance on scholarship applications by emailing them at this address. Also, the Illinois Coalition Assisting Undocumented Students Education, or ICAUSE. This university student organization is made up of immigrant students and allies. They focus on representation, resource gathering, and empowering the immigrant community. And you can contact them at this address here. So, outside of the university here, there are some statewide tools, including the Illinois Coalition for Immigrants and Refugee Rights, which we call ICER. Useful tools and information for immigrant families in the state of Illinois, including COVID-19 support, information on responding to immigration and customs enforcement, and getting legal help, can be contacted here. Excuse me. Food distribution. People are struggling with food right now. In Chicago, the Greater Chicago Food Depository, and in Champaign-Urbana, Community Resources Guide is a collaborative effort between School of Social Work and Uniplace Christian Church, and their address is here. The University YMCA, COVID-19 resources for immigrants in Champaign County, including La Linea Immigrant Helpline and the new Immigrant Welcome Center Immigrant Relief Fund.